He was a ghost trapped in a synthetic shell. His name was Joshua, but that felt like an abstract concept, a variable in an equation he didn't construct. He was a senior risk analyst for a global investment firm, and his world was an intricate grid of probabilities, default swaps, and optimized portfolios. Look closely at Joshua. Focus on his right index finger. It hovered millimeters above the enter key, a tiny action that would approve a $40 million loan. He could feel the minute resistance of the key's spring mechanism. He pressed it. Click. Done. He didn't feel power, he felt the lack of it. Imagine the office air. It was recycled, flavorless, sterile. It smelled faintly of stale coffee, ozone from the printers, and the mineral scent of dust collecting on warm circuit boards. This was the scent of success. This was his air. He looked at his workspace. It was clinically organized. A single, brittle ficus plant sat in the corner, its leaves coated in a fine layer of gray grime, a visual representation of his own spirit. He knew every scratch on his desk, every pixel glitch on his dual monitors. When the day was done, a concept defined only by the time clock, he returned to his apartment. Number 412, a 22nd floor unit in a concrete spire designed for maximum density and minimum interaction. The apartment was a perfect reflection of the office. Gray walls, laminate floors, and a view of other concrete spires lost in the gray, wet mist of the city. Rain had fallen for 9 months straight. He felt the dampness in his bones, a permanent chill that no heater could touch. Joshua sat on his beige sofa, a microwave dinner cooling on the coffee table. He was a man defined by what he avoided. He avoided noise, conflict, and feeling. He was numb, and he accepted it because the alternative, the void, was too terrifying to contemplate. There was only one anomaly, a patch of moisture on the wallpaper in his narrow hallway right next to the utility closet. Most people would have bleached it, painted over it. Joshua found himself staring at it. The moisture had bloomed into an irregular shape. To him, it wasn't a flaw, it was a silhouette. It looked like a map of a single, small island, its coastline defined by sharp, dark peninsulas. When the apartment was silent, when the city grid was asleep, he could swear he heard a sound from that damp wall. Not the wet drip of a leaky pipe, but a low, resonant thrum, like the vibration of an infinitely distant drum. It happened on a Tuesday, the day of greatest default probability. Joshua returned home, his mind a buzz of numbers, feeling more hollow than usual. He stood in the hallway, staring at the damp silhouette. The thrumming from the wall was louder, more localized. He could feel it vibrating through the laminate floor, rattling his teeth. He didn't think thought was a function of the grid. He felt. He reached out and pressed his palm against the damp patch. The wall didn't resist. It was warm, surprisingly soft, like aged, sun-bleached driftwood. His hand sank into the paper, then his wrist. A current of electric warmth surged up his arm. It tasted of salt. Joshua made the decision that ruined his optimized life. He stepped forward, pushing his entire body through the wall. The transition was a sensory cataclysm. The gray, wet chill of number 412 was vaporized. He didn't fall, he arrived. He was standing barefoot on sand so fine it felt like powdered pearl. The air was heavy, humid, and blindingly bright. Sunlight, actual unfiltered sunlight, struck his skin like a physical caress. He looked around, terrified and instantly healed. He was in a caldera, a perfect lagoon of impossible, vibrant jade green enclosed by massive, dark cliffs of ancient basalt. But the basalt wasn't stark. It was suffocatingly lush, draped in emerald vines, cascading ferns, and 1,000 blooming flowers. Hibiscus, gardenia, thyre. Their scents so potent they felt like a drug. The lagoon was alive. He saw a shape glide beneath the surface, a great green sea turtle, its shell reflecting the light. A school of parrotfish exploded in a rainbow of colors nearby. This wasn't a landscape, it was a country, Mana-Dyarral. He could feel its sovereignty. The didgeridoo thrumming from the soundscape wasn't music, it was the frequency of the land itself. The Te Feti, the Great Pulse. He was wearing his synthetic suit, but here it felt like an alien artifact, a violation. He looked at his hands, the hands that approved loans. He saw the texture of his own skin illuminated. He wasn't a variable. He was a physical being connected to this powerful, vibrant force. He spent hours there, lost in the Te Feti. He walked into the shallows, the water cool and invigorating, shocking his senses. When he finally forced himself back through the threshold, only 10 minutes had passed in number 412. But everything had changed. The gray was no longer just uniform. It was a prison. The next morning, the anesthesia failed. Joshua was sitting at his dual monitors, reviewing a highly optimized swap structure. A colleague, an ambitious analyst named Miller, was discussing a new algorithmic model. Miller's voice, which usually registered as a neutral variable, now sounded like nails on a chalkboard. It was sharp, sterile, and utterly without country. Joshua looked at the numbers on the screen. They had no mana. They were abstract, disconnected, pointless. He looked at his brittle ficus plant. He felt a sudden, profound rage. Why was this plant forced to live in this gray rot? He felt a corresponding rage at his own gray rot. He began to lead a double life. Every night he visited the Te Feti. Each visit was longer, deeper. He learned to track the turtles, to identify the gardenia blooms, to breathe with the didgeridoo heartbeat. He felt his internal reservoir of mana filling up, a slow, silent explosion of color in his soul. But the return was agony. The transition from the blinding light and potent scents of the lagoon to the sterile, recycled scent of his apartment was physically sickening. He began to feel like an amphibian forced to live on land, gasping for air that was too thin. His performance plummeted. He missed deadlines. His risk assessments were emotional rather than analytical. He received warnings. His boss, a man whose identity was entirely fused with the firm, was confused. "Joshua, you're usually so reliable. What's happened?" Joshua couldn't answer. He couldn't say, "I've found a connection to the sovereign force of existence, and your optimized models are a form of spiritual slow death." Instead, he just stared. He was waiting for something, a final variable. Probability suggested he would eventually normalize and accept the anesthesia again. But he wasn't operating on probability anymore. He was operating on mana. The didgeridoo thrum in the soundscape became faster, more insistent, matching a newly discovered beat, traditional Polynesian drums, which began to echo in the background. The confrontation was inevitable. His boss called him in. The meeting was a masterpiece of corporate sterility. His boss discussed commitment and misalignment. While his boss spoke, Joshua looked out the window. He didn't see the city mist. He saw the Jade Lagoon. He saw a small, traditional fail, a thatched hut built from basalt rocks and palm fronds. He saw himself sitting there building it. He understood the sovereignty of his situation. He was no longer a ghost. He was the sovereign owner of his own connection to the Te Feti. To return to the grid, even a little, would be to violate that sovereignty. He waited for his boss to finish a sentence about team cohesion. Joshua stood up. He left the file he was holding on the desk. "I'm not misaligned," Joshua said softly. "I've just aligned with something else." He walked out of the office, down the elevator, and into the rain. The rain that used to be a threat was now just water. He returned to number 412. He stood before the damp silhouette. He knew there was no probability left, only sovereignty. Joshua didn't press his hand against the wall. He pressed his forehead against the silhouette. He closed his eyes. He didn't think about his 401k, his career, or the logic. He breathed into the Te Feti. The low-frequency didgeridoo thrum vibrated through his entire skull, shattering the last remnants of the office hum. He stepped through, the gray vaporized. The warmth hit him. The scent of tire was so strong it made him dizzy. This return was different. He knew there was no return ticket. He was sovereign on his own Mana-Dyarral. Joshua didn't just stay in the lagoon. he built his new life. He constructed his fail, learning to stack the basalt rocks with a focus that Excel could never demand. He learned to harvest coconuts, to fish with respect, to understand the cycles of the Te Feti. Joshua, the gray risk analyst, became a man of color, light, and mana. He was no longer trying to optimize his life. He was living it. He looked up at the basalt cliffs, draped in emerald life, and took a deep, sovereign breath. It was the same breath that connected the didgeridoo to the ocean waves. He had optimized his probabilities into a single, perfect reality. He was home. Open your eyes. Feel the sovereignty of Joshua. He is complete.